The New Testament has many incidents involving Jesus driving out evil spirits. In fact, at one point he was even criticized for doing it, if you can imagine that. His enemies didn't deny that he drove out evil spirits, so they accused him of being an agent of the devil, which of course was blasphemy and a contradiction, as Jesus pointed out. How or why would Satan drive out his own? Jesus gave to the church the capacity to drive out demons. This applies to all of us at some level. The last rite, that's R-I-T-E, to be revised by the Second Vatican Council was the rite of exorcism. It was revised about 10 years ago. It's in Latin, although the devil understands Latin, to be sure. The rite is used and has been used in documented cases of possession, I'm sure. Certainly, the old form of the rite has been used many times when there are indications that evil spirits are in fact molesting people. Over the course of the years, I've been asked a number of times to perform exorcisms. I tell the people that I'm not deputed to be an exorcist on the part of the diocese. Each bishop is at least encouraged, if not directed, by the Holy See to have someone designated as an exorcist. The identity of the priest is usually not revealed. And the other thing is that I tell people is that most of the time we're not dealing with situations of possession or even infestation, but there are other things that can cause certain disturbances. So the last thing we try is the route of exorcism. The church does not see the devil under every bed, although evil spirits can work a certain amount of mischief. In one particular case, the mother called me. She said she was a Methodist, which was fine. And I said, "Why are you calling the priest?" She said, "Well, because I understand that priests have the capacity to exorcise." I said, "Well, with permission, yes." And I asked her some questions, and I said, "Look, I'll come over to your house and bless the house." A little while later, she called me back and said, "Don't bother coming. My son had watched something on television, and he was all afraid. It was a figment of his imagination." Another time, a woman called me and asked that I come to her house because there were some very strange things going on there. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about her. I asked her, "Well, what's your religion?" She said, "Well, I'm a Catholic." I said, "Well, do you go to Mass and confession, this type of stuff?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, why don't you start back? Because this is part of a very important part of our arsenal in standing up to the forces of evil and living a life of holiness." A little while later, her sister called me back and asked me not to come to the house. The sad thing about this is the individual was so used to living her life, which apparently was not a good life, that she would rather have lived with the devil at that level, expecting that there wouldn't be any other trouble. One of the things that opens the door up to evil spirits, of course, is serious sin. This is why Jesus says, whatever is causing people to sin, they should cut it out or pluck it out. It was very graphic language. Evil spirits most of the time work at the level of temptation. Temptation is much subtler. The devils want to be concealed. And so we have certain types of temptations. Now, not all temptations are from the devil, in the sense that people can be tempted by the world, the things that other people say or think, or particular styles and fashions of the time that can seduce people into becoming compromised. So there's much of that taking place today. People can also be tempted by their own weaknesses. And it is a foolish person who does not have any sort of strategy to deal with temptation. For example, a person has a propensity for indulging in alcohol, or overindulging, I should say. A person would be very foolish to go into a bar or to fraternize with someone he knows will lead him into sin. It is important for all of us to be wise. This is what Jesus meant when he said that we must be wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. To be a disciple means that we have to be clever, not in the sense of self-serving, but in the sense of how can I live the life that the Lord wants me to live, living it even when it's difficult to live the way I should live. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that we must manfully resist temptation. Sometimes people think that baptism is magical and that everything is fine. Actually, when people grow into adulthood, they develop the capacity for responsible living, and certainly in their teenage years, the capacity also to commit serious sins. We must acknowledge our weakness and not live as if we weren't weak at all. This is why we need the sacraments. I would urge everybody to make regular use of the sacrament of confession. I go to confession myself. The Holy Father goes to confession. It's very, very important. If anybody ever tells you, and I've heard this from people, that so-and-so said that we don't have to go to confession anymore, that is simply not true. There's nothing official about that. It's very important for us to manage our lives at the level of how we're living and to rely on the grace of God by using what God has provided. Going to Mass is extremely important. It's the center of the Church's life. If a Catholic person who is otherwise not impeded by ill health or other moral possibilities doesn't go to Mass, he's not living the Catholic life. He's not contributing to the mission of the Church with his presence, with his prayers. All of us have some responsibility regarding driving out evil spirits. Many of us have learned the prayer of St. Michael. St. Michael, the Archangel, defend us in battle. The prayer was written by Pope Leo XIII, who died in 1902. Apparently, after Mass, he had a vision, a terrible vision of the Lord and Satan saying something to the effect that he would destroy the Church in a 100-year period. And the Holy Father was so upset about this, he wrote an exorcism prayer, part of which is the prayer of St. Michael. Also, when we pray the Lord's Prayer, we are asking at the end of the prayer that we not be led into temptation. It doesn't mean that God leads us into temptation. He doesn't. But what we're trying to do is we're asking the Lord to protect us from being tempted, or if we're tempted, that we might have the capacity to resist the temptation because we're weak. Finally, at the end of the Lord's Prayer, we ask that we be delivered from evil. The perpetrator of evil, at least at its base, is Satan. The original form of the prayer was that we be delivered from the evil one, who is a terrible and terrifying reality which we should never take for granted. Satan can corrupt people. He does corrupt people today, and he's after people. If we read, for example, about St. John Vianney, who was a parish priest in France right after the French Revolution, John Vianney would be molested by the devil at night, and he knew that when he had a particularly rough time of it, that there would be a great conversion the next day in the confessional. He heard confessions for many hours a day, and he understood that the devil or the devils were very much upset with him for being holy and for conferring holiness on people, which is precisely the thing that the devil doesn't want. If we're not living in a state of grace, or if we don't care about committing sin, we're actually contributing to the dominion of Satan. We, as Catholic people, we have to be holy. St. Paul tells us that many times. We cannot take for granted that it's simply good enough to act like the majority of people in our society and everything will be fine. We can't do that, as the Holy Father himself has pointed out. Another thing that Jesus talks about is scandal. Scandal means, in its worst sense, leading somebody into sin, or at least indirectly by giving somebody a bad example such that the person might commit sin. There's plenty of scandal going on. There was a columnist who writes for one of the papers in the state of Ohio, who's supposed to be a Catholic, but she writes in her column, this was about 3 years ago, that she drove a young woman to an abortuary, and she thought it was a great thing that she did this, and she was bragging about it. The woman has never done any public reparation for this. She's never apologized, but she's given a great deal of scandal to many people, as well as enabling somebody to do something terrible. There are many people, unfortunately, in positions of government who don't care about scandal. I mean, anybody who enshrines into law the capacity for people to live a life of public sodomy is actually doing the work of the devil. We have to be careful about this. We simply can't embrace it because other people think it's okay. We have to pray for people. If we don't pray every day as Catholic people, we're actually letting down so many people who need to be helped by spiritual intercession. Please pray, everybody here, 20 minutes a day. Pray 15 minutes a day. Pray a half an hour. Do whatever you can. I mean, it's very important. The faith is much more valuable than simply reserving it to one day a week on Sunday morning. Catholic faith is needed throughout the week because the world needs Jesus. This is the point. The world needs the Holy Spirit. The world needs to have evil spirits driven out. And Jesus isn't going to come down on a cloud and do it himself. He wants people such as us to help him. This is the whole point. When we're living the Christian life, we're actually living as warriors. In fact, the old way of expressing the theology of confirmation is that a person becomes a soldier of Christ. I would urge the confirmandi here, and the classes here, and the parents, to think about this. How might I be a warrior, a spiritual warrior for God and the world? And it doesn't mean we put on armaments, but it means that we indulge against the powers of evil by using spiritual weapons. The truth is one of them. Prayer, holiness, and so forth. St. Paul talks about the spiritual warfare in Ephesians chapter 6. You can read it at home. He talks about the spirits, the forces, the powers of darkness. We're involved in this. Even if we don't think we are, we are. If we don't realize the battle is going on, then that's a sign of defeat already. We can't let ourselves be defeated. Finally, Jesus talks about Gehenna, which is Gehenna. I've seen Gehenna. It's a valley or a small depression, which at one time was used as a place for human sacrifice. The Israelites wanted to be like the other people around them. It sounds kind of familiar, who were sacrificing their children to false gods, and they went to this place, and the place was then accursed. After a while, when people were finally reformed, it became a garbage dump. So Gehenna stands, it became a symbol for hell itself. There are people who complain that we have a God who sends people to hell. I can tell you we do not. God does not send anyone to hell. People do it to themselves. This is why we have Jesus. This is why we have the church. This is why we have our faith, to preserve us from such a terrible fate. Anyone who ends up in eternal misery, it's there through his own fault. It's interesting that in Fatima, where Our Lady appeared to the shepherd children in 1917, they saw a vision of hell. And one of the things that she said to them was that most of the people who are in hell are people who didn't believe it existed, which is another thing to think about. We have to be open to reality and not simply think that we can construct our own reality. I mean, life is serious business. We all have responsibilities. Our faith is a wonderful thing. It's a great gift. The sacraments are great gifts. The teachings of the faith are great gifts. The Holy Father is a great gift. All of these things. We have such potential as Catholic people, such potential as disciples of Christ and as people of God. As one priest said, it's like a person who has $1 million but doesn't even know it. We have so much going for us. The thing is, we have to put it into effect
Take it seriously. We have everything to gain, everything to lose if we don't.